Hey there, let's talk quickly about what the actual 2025 STAAR English 1 and English 2 reading question stems look like. Now, I'm not looking at every single question stem that was on the STAAR, but I am looking at the ones that were connected to the TEKS that we saw the most often. So the TEKS that were hit twice on either the English 1 or the English 2 or both. So let's take a look. So the first TEK we're looking at is TEKS 2A, and this is asking students to use print or digital resources to define or clarify their understanding of a vocabulary word. And I believe when we look at our two vocabulary TEKS, 2A and 2B, 2A is a little bit more difficult, and that's why it was asked twice on the English 2 and only once on the English 1. So here you can see the state is just going to ask students to read a dictionary entry. It has 4 different definitions, and students need to go back to a paragraph with the word in it and read so that they can understand which definition best matches the context of that word. I think what's really difficult about this question is it's not very easy for us as teachers to replicate this question in our reading lessons. It can be difficult to find a vocabulary word that has 4 different definitions that aren't very similar to one another, so the answer seems tricky. So I think this one can be difficult to put into our reading lessons, but I also think we really should try so that students are comfortable and familiar with this question because it is very likely it's going to show up at least once. Looking at TEK 2B, that talks about connotation and denotation, asked twice on the English 1 and asked once on the English 2. This will simply have students refer back to a paragraph and then ask them what a word means. Now, there are 2 ways that students can easily get this point. Let me show you. Okay, and here we are in the English 1 released exam from 2025. And you can see this question was the very first question. It says in paragraph 5, what does the word refutes mean? So first strategy is, of course, just coming down to paragraph 5 and finding the word refutes. Now, what is this paragraph about? If we look at here, we see some clues. Of course, we have the word argue right here. We also have the word opponent. And so those 2 words alone should help students understand that refute means, of course, to argue too. But the other thing your students can do is use this online dictionary. Now, when they type in the word refutes, it's not going to give them the word refutes, but it will say, did you mean refute? Or we did find refute. And when you scroll down, again, you can see the word argument. So this question, if your students have these 2 strategies, can be an easy point for your students to get. Now, I do want to add that while it is really hard to get students to use the online dictionary through the Cambium platform, especially during like a regular lesson, I do think it's important a week before the STAAR exam to have students become familiar with the online dictionary. And I do have a couple of really simple, fun activities for students to do. If you're interested in those, they are linked below. All right, moving on to TEKS 4F, making inferences. Asked on the English 1 3 times, asked on the English 2 only once, but I feel like this shows up every year at least a couple of times. So here we have students looking at a quotation, and this time it actually says just very directly the quotation best supports the inference that. I think that's really interesting because in the past couple of years, the wording from TEA has been, the reader can infer, or the reader can conclude, the reader can understand. And here on this example, you will see that it is phrased, what can the reader infer? So again, that has been pretty common, as well as what can the reader understand or conclude. Looking at our crossover questions, we know these are going to be on the STAAR exam last year, 2025, and the year before, 2024. there were 4 crossover questions on both the English 1 and the English 2. So, what are the crossover questions? These can get kind of lengthy because they are asking for students to find the similarities or differences between 2 different texts, one text being from nonfiction and one text being from fiction. And so TEA puts the full title of both of those texts in the question, which again can be a little overwhelming for some of our students. So I do think it's important that we practice these throughout the years so that students become familiar with these questions. Students will also know this is a crossover question because it always has similar, same, both, differ, different, in all caps, and bold. Now, another thing I want to quickly point out is that on the 2024 exam for English 1, this crossover question was one of those multi-select formats. So students had to pick 2 of 6 answer choices. On the English 2, one of the crossover questions was in grid form, meaning they had, I believe, maybe 4 inferences about the 2 texts, and then they had character A, character B, and a column for both. And students had to read the inference and decide if that inference could be made for, again, character A, character B, or both characters. So that was a little different from what we've seen in the past. And here is an example of a crossover question where it's asking students to find the difference. TEKS 5C is a pretty common TEK that we see on the STAAR year after year using text evidence, asked on the English 1 and the English 2 twice. This one has the students looking at a quotation that supports the conclusion. So this is just which quotation supports this idea. And that's the other way we usually see it phrased as well. Either supports the conclusion or on this one supports the idea. TEKS 8A is about author's purpose, asked once on the English 1, asked twice on the English 2. Here we have a quotation, and it's simply asking, the author includes this information most likely to. And that phrase is used a lot, not just for this TEK, most likely to. Here we go in TEKS 8B, analyzing text structure. And again, since this is coming from the author, we are going to see that phrase, the most likely reason the author does blah, blah, blah. Here on this question, they're asking about using a cause and effect structure, which I think most of our students should be able to analyze. And then on this one, they asked for the author's purpose or author's reason for presenting information in a chronological way. Now, we haven't seen a lot of text structure questions in the past, so seeing 2 on both the English 1 and the English 2 in 2025 kind of got my attention. Will we be seeing more of these in 2026? Only time will tell. Finally, let's look at TEKS 8D, author's use of language on the English 1 twice and the English 2 once. We're going to see that the verb emphasize is used a lot for this type of question. So the author uses this phrase, the author uses this dialogue, the author uses this image, and then it usually follows up with to emphasize that. And here we see it again. Here is a sentence with some dialogue to emphasize that. So there you have it. There are just a couple of the question stems that we see with the more frequently used TEKS on the reading section of the English 1 and English 2 STAAR exams. If you would like to bring these questions into your own instruction, I do have a Google Doc where you can simply copy and paste the question stems from the doc into your own instructional materials. The questions are organized by genre as they appeared on the Release STAAR exams, with the TEK following each question, so you can also search by TEK if that is something that you need. So any insights that you have, questions, comments, feel free to leave them below. And good luck to you and your students on the STAAR this year.